So why is payroll an ideal candidate for automation? Well, I mean, as it says here, payroll, as we all know, is very repetitive, because of that weekly, monthly payroll cycle. But also, as you often find within payroll, there's a lot of manual intervention that can cause end of problems. You can do a good element of validation against a sort of set of parameters within payroll. So, for example, if timesheets been received, do the hours total the right weekly or monthly amount, that type of thing. And obviously payroll is dealing with high volumes of data and information that's, often there's a very tight time window for all of that information to be checked. So it's hugely important that it's right and it's completed within those timescales. So ideal candidate. So this specific client and their situation. So some of the challenges they were facing. So it's not uncommon that there was a lack of integration between not only the different departments but also the systems themselves, which ultimately resulted in a lot of manual processes and a lot of manual validation and checking. Timescales were extremely tight, especially because it was running different payrolls over different periods of time. And it was a high risk area because of lots of issues and lots of noise in the past. So for this specific payroll, it was a payroll that was run in-house, about 6,000 employees. There were 4 payroll analysts, 1 payroll manager, and it was processing about 31,000 data items each month. And ultimately, their vision was to reduce the manual effort, the checking and the validation, but importantly, so that it was freeing up time to do more of the value-adding activities and priorities. It wasn't about replacing people's jobs. It was about doing some of that stuff that could be done kind of out of hours, so that, as I say, people could spend the time doing the stuff that was really important and was real value add. So Andrew, can I hand over to you to just go through some more of the specifics?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we're looking at a diagram that I'm certain nobody can read. That is really the end-to-end payroll process. And this is really where I realize and our path come together. So I realized worked with this client to map out exactly what was happening within payroll. And then we looked at that and we identified what we felt was like the low-hanging fruit, was like the right place to start. Certainly not the only place that we could apply automation, but a good place where we could get, for lack of a better term, a good, bang for the buck, as they say. So if we could zoom in a little bit on the beginning of that process, so you'll see, the very first 5 steps of that process is where we focused on originally. And step 1 is receiving documents. And in payroll, it's fairly complicated, especially when you're dealing with a company of this size, with this number of employees. Twice a month, they're processing payroll, they're receiving documents from HR, from pension, from payroll, from TNA systems. These come in a whole bunch of different formats, and you're looking at people's timesheets, you're looking at which employees have started during that pay period, which have left, which ones are getting overtime, and if they're getting overtime, what kind of overtime they're getting. Do they have an early shift allowance and late shift allowance, sick pay, holiday pay? There's a whole bunch of information that has to come in and be accounted for in the payroll process. The very first step was just receiving those documents, making sure that all of the documents came in, making sure that they were all named and stored and put into the right folders and set up in the right way for the payroll process. The second step was really to perform a QA check on these documents. So are all the documents there? Opening up each document and looking at all of the data elements. Are any data elements missing? Are they all formatted properly? Is there any duplication? And if there's duplication, removing those duplicate records. Then opening the previous period records and looking at those records and running a series of validation checks just to see, did you get a 10x increase in hours from an employee from one pay period to the next? Might be a red flag that maybe there's a data error issue. So we were able to automate some of those, and then others, we essentially had a person in the department still continue to do a manual check, but we were able to speed up the quality control check pretty significantly. The next step was really to input that data into the payroll system. Once it was in the system, then running a number of validation reports to make sure that the data had been put into the system correctly and that there were no issues with bank details, with salary change checks, unpaid sick leave, tax rates. So there was a lot of different checks that we did after it was put into the payroll system, but before payroll was run. And then any issues that were identified were sent to a person to figure out kind of what's going on here, how should this be, how can we fix this, and getting the data just right, and then running payroll. So you'll see it in this process. It was a combination of having the digital employees or digital workers handle a lot of those routine tasks so that the team doing payroll could do things much more efficiently and really focus on things that were problems that needed to be figured out as opposed to just routine checks. So that is that's the work that we did in this case. In addition to making everybody's lives easier, improving quality and things like this, we also ran a financial assessment of this. And I think this is interesting just because this was really just step one in working with this company, but I wanted to break out what step one looked like just from a business case perspective. So this will be in the deck that will be sent out to everybody afterwards. But the things to take away from this were this project took about 4 months to complete. So if you looked at this over a 3-year period and you said the first 4 months were spent building, programming, automating, checking, testing, this is not a huge project. And the next 8 months, you were starting to get benefits. So in year 1, it was 4 months of build and 8 months of running. And then years 2 and 3, again, you're just running and maintaining it for those years. So you'll notice that the costs are pretty much front loaded into year 1, which makes sense because that's when the development's done. But even with all of these costs loaded into year 1, you're still showing a benefit in year 1, which is nice. So it's great to have a project that pays for itself within the first year. And then when you look at years 2 and years 3, the maintenance of these digital employees, you have to have somebody there to maintain them. You need to make sure that they're running all the time, but they don't break very often. They're very kind of resilient to that. And you can also code them to do some error handling and error checking and stuff of themselves, so they become more and more robust over time. But if you look at this business case over a 3-year period, it looks like they got about $220,000 worth of value out of this over that 3-year period. And this really is just step one in terms of a larger automation program. Typically, you don't go in and build a whole program just to do a handful of tasks like this. You build a program so that you can look throughout your organization at multiple different processes and see where automation can be applied. So anyway, hopefully having these numbers is helpful to people just to kind of understand what it takes. I've also put in here, what is the cost of the infrastructure that you run the bots on? What is the cost of the RPA software? So you have a full picture, at least just for this specific automation project.